Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is You Can Cook. Today we're doing a hot and spicy chow mein, which is a homage to a chow mein that you can find here in Oakland, California, from a restaurant called Shandong, which is sort of like a legendary noodle house here in Oakland. So generally, when people ask where to get good Chinese food, that's probably like one of the first places that come up is Shandong, and this is one of their really popular chow meins. So today we're going to take a shot at replicating that chow mein. I don't know how close it comes, but it's as close as I could get to reproducing it, and it has a number of the ingredients that I think are really critical to how they're doing it, I think. So if you have any questions for me, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about chow mein, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful. As always, if you're looking for the recipes, those will always already live over on my YouTube channel. What we're cooking today is a recipe that came out on the channel last Friday. So last Friday we came out with this recipe for this particular chow mein. Those generally come up every Friday, so if you want to check out new stuff, those are out every Friday. So if you haven't yet and you're watching on Reddit, check out what's going on over on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, you're already there. Good job. Cool. So as with most of our stir fries, I'm kicking things off by chopping, fine mincing. This is 4 cloves of garlic, which we're crushing and mincing. Excuse me. Generally, when you're working with garlic like this, you could just give it a really good smack with the flat side of your knife, and you'll notice before I even started chopping this, when you crush it real good, it's already pretty much falling apart. That means that you can essentially give it a rough chop, and that's basically all you really need to do. If you're dealing with like a really large clove of garlic, you might need to give it a little bit more chopping, but in this case we're already good to go. So what I usually like to do is just give it a really good smack, and that's about all you need to do. Sometimes you don't even need to chop it. So that's our garlic. And then next what we're going to do is fine mince. This is going to be about an inch, relatively close to an inch worth of ginger. So what we're going to do is start off by peeling it. So what I like to do, lots of people try to take out their potato peelers for this part, which you don't need to do. Technically, you don't actually even need to peel ginger. You can pretty much just go straight ahead and start chopping it. It's, what will happen is if you do peel your ginger and then you let it sit for a couple more days, it will basically just dry up on that exterior, and it's going to turn back into what you're already eating. So if you really don't want to, you could probably just give this ginger a quick rinse and then just start chopping it. It's basically the same thing. What I like with the back, which is really gentle and a lot easier to do than with a potato peeler, because you don't have to worry about chopping your finger up. And then what we're going to do is our fine mince here. So I'm going with slices down the center, and then going down for our rough dice, or I guess you could dice at that point. And then we're going to run our knife through it for our fine mince, like so. For our fine minces, it's very useful to have a very sharp knife. Actually, generally, anytime that you're chopping anything, it's very useful to have a sharp knife. It's really hard to chop stuff with a dull knife. So what I always recommend, if you're doing lots of chopping, you want to make sure that your knife real sharp. Otherwise, it can get pretty dangerous. But in particular, though, if you're doing fine minces like this, they can be really annoying to do if your knife is not sharp, because it will take forever. You'll probably will take twice as long to do that mince if your knife is dull. So that's our garlic and ginger. In a lot of the You Can Cook recipes, you'll see that referred to as the aromatic elements of our wok fry. Next up, we're going to dive into a couple of different veggies today. So in the original recipe that I had written, that included, and this is also what's in the original Shandong hot and spicy chow mein. That was a couple of carrots, a zucchini, and half of a sweet white onion. Today we're going to omit that zucchini, mostly because I forgot to buy the zucchini, but also because I don't think it's that important. It already has a number of veggies in it, and if you leave one of those veggies out, it just makes it a little bit less hearty. So I think we'll be okay. But if you're trying to stick close to what the original Shandong version was, it has a squash vegetable in it, so it has that veggie, or that zucchini. So if you can't find a zucchini, really any kind of hearty veggie will do too. So you can also, my first substitution would be a carrot, actually, which is why I'm guessing they have a carrot in it already. You could also use something like a bell pepper. That would work really, really well. You could use a squash, like an actual yellow squash. That would be really tasty. Or if you just go out of your way and go get a zucchini, don't forget to buy it like I did. You'll be okay. Or if you do forget to buy it, it's going to be okay too. There's a whole bunch of veggies in this already, so not a big deal. For our carrots, though, what we're going to do is we're starting off by giving these a quick peel. And then I'm chopping off the root ends first. So those are our root ends. And then what I like to do here is I like to chop off these tips at the end right here. That usually is where the carrots automatically really, really thin starts causing a couple of different problems. The main problem that I run into with that is, first of all, it gets hard to chop even when you have this. That's the part that ends up burning when you start going into stir fry those carrots. So what I like to do is chop off that really, really thin tapered edge. Also, where my experience, the part that gets a little bit bitter too, so, because it's the youngest part. Otherwise, with our carrots, I'm slicing these up. We're going in for the closest we can to even-sized coins. What I like to do, so the goal with any time that you're working with a carrot is trying to get them in as evenly sized as possible. This can be most challenging because, as with any carrot, they taper off at the end, which means that they're oblong in shape at all times because they taper off at the end. So what I like to do is chop up those smaller pieces, so the smaller end of the carrot on a bias like this, which gives us these larger coin shapes, and then take these larger bits of the carrot and just slice them straight, and then we have something close to an evenly sized chop. And that's really important because what we're trying to do is make sure that these carrots, they cook evenly. If you don't chop them evenly, then they're also not going to cook evenly, which is not our objective. All right, next up is our third veggie of the day. This is the second and only, the only other veggie of the day, which is a onion. So what we're working with today, this is a sweet white onion. The difference, someone asked me recently what is a sweet white onion. A sweet white onion is just the full name of a white onion, which looks like this. They're white, same thing. You could also use a yellow onion, same thing. Or it's going to taste very similar. At least it's not the same thing technically because it is a different breed of onion. But the qualities are going to be very similar. They're both very sweet. They have very similar qualities too. The only thing that I would say to avoid, if you can, is something like a purple onion or a red onion, depending on where in the world you are. Those are going to have a little bit of a different taste to it. But more importantly, they're also going to be a very, very different color. So the presentation is going to look a little bit weird if you use something like that. My personal preference is the white onion because it's a little bit sweeter. So I'm slicing these up. What I'm doing here, you'll notice that my knife is at a slight angle. What we're trying to do, just like as we were doing with the carrots, is get these onions chopped up in an even size. So once again, our goal here is to make sure that we don't have too many. There's eventually going to be some unevenly shaped pieces of onions. So what we don't want to do are things like this. So we don't want this sort of stuff. We don't want different shapes and sizes of our onion, or not as little as possible. Eventually that is going to happen. Again, for the same purpose, if they are chopped too much, if too much of your onion are chopped unevenly, then eventually what's going to happen is they're also going to cook unevenly, especially in fries. So our goal, just like anything else that we're doing, is to make sure that these things chop up evenly. Next up, this is some firm tofu, which I'm going to be using today because I forgot to get chicken, so we don't have chicken today. If you're trying to reference the original Shandong hot and spicy chow mein, that version you can get it in a number of different proteins. I believe you can get it with chicken, beef, and I know that you can get it with chicken, beef, and prawns. I believe you can also get it with tofu, which will work really well too. So you can that protein is relatively interchangeable. The original recipe that we did, it uses chicken thigh, which is generally my preference, mostly because it's what I always have on hand. Today we're going to be using this tofu because I forgot to buy chicken today, so we don't have chicken. So here we are. It's not going to be the same thing. I don't recommend using tofu and chicken interchangeably, but here we are. And the first thing that we're doing, so what if we are using this as part, is something that you would not necessarily. First thing that I like to do anytime that I'm working with firm tofu, especially if I'm using it in the context that we are, is squeeze out some of this water. So tofu, when it's bound together, it's bounded together with water. So they press it really blocks. So what happens is all of this water, it starts coming out on your cutting board. So what we want this to do is for this water to come out as much as possible on your cutting board and not in your wok. If it comes out in the wok, what it's going to do is it's going to start dropping the temperature of your wok very dramatically, which is not great. You want to try and avoid that as much as possible because the more liquid that you introduce into a wok fry, the more trouble that you're going to have keeping that wok hot. That's the number one objective of almost all wok frying, is that we're trying to keep that wok hot. So we're squeezing out as much water as we can, and then we're going to take a second and also very important step. Once again, because what we're going to try and do is sear this in our wok fry. Once again, we need this tofu to be as dry as possible. So if you're really committed, you could even drop it onto a paper towel and start literally going piece by piece. And I've seen some people do that. That's a lot of work. I'm not going to do that because it's a little bit too much work for me, but that's our tofu. So I'm going to set that aside for a second, and then, you want to do a marinade? Yeah, let's do a marinade. Yeah, I'm going to skip the marinade. So that's our tofu. We did have a marinade that goes into the, I don't think it's going to work because it's completely different protein. So if you're following the original recipe, that original recipe calls for a whole marinade that goes into the chicken. I'm going to skip that part because I don't think it's going to work well with tofu. It includes a couple of different things, but our main objective is we're trying to get that tofu to sear properly and get nice crispy pieces of tofu. This camera will continue to shut off. It shuts off every 30 minutes, and there is literally nothing I can do about it other than buy a new camera. I think that's the main thing that I can do. All right, next up, what we're gonna do is set up our sauce here. So if you're watching lots of restaurant chefs, usually what you'll see them do, they'll probably be working with a big old ladle, and you'll see them ladle that stuff straight into the wok. So what that is probably some sort of house blend of sauces. What we're gonna do is assemble that off to do because it gives us the opportunity to taste things. Generally, if you're following my recipes, you'll find that I'm inserting as much opportunity as possible to taste stuff off heat before we start cooking, because it's very, very useful to stop and taste as much as possible. Otherwise, you're going to start running into issues where cooking so fast that you're really not going to have very much opportunity to stop. So this is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of dark soy sauce. That's my oyster sauce. There it is. This is 1 tablespoon of oyster sauce. Oyster sauce, as the name implies, comes from the fermentation of oyster, which means that we get lots of fishy umami from it. So if you can't find oyster sauce, if you can't get your hands on it, it's pretty readily available at most Chinese markets. If you can't find it though, fish sauce is a really great alternative. Or if you can't find that either, what I always recommend is a bit of anchovy. Rice vinegar. Next up, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar. This is going to give us a little bit of brightness. And then last up are the 2 big elements of our sauce today. In my opinion, maybe the most important 2 things that go into a hot and spicy chow mein, because it's how you get the hotness of a hot and spicy chow mein. So what I think it is my best guess at what I think it is based on how I've tasted it before, but also how it presents. You can see the little flakes of the stuff that are floating around. This is going to be a single tablespoon of doubanjiang, which is comes from the fermentation of chili paste. This is going to be some really aggressive heat. So what I like to say is, if you like it really spicy, you could dial this part up. If you don't like spicy stuff, I would say dial it back down, to your own discretion. And then next up is going to be 2 tablespoons of lao gan ma. Ask. What lao gan ma is a form of red chili flake that has been slow roasted in oil. I think it's done in soybean oil. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure it's done in soybean oil. And lao gan ma, unlike that dobanjang, is the exact opposite. So it's a little bit more mellow, kind of like a more pervasive and oily heat, but not quite as like aggressive or in your face the way dobanjang is. So I like to pair them together because I think that the dobanjang, the lao gan ma, they complement each other really nicely with that little bit of aggressive heat and a little bit of more oily and like textured heat. Ooh, beef ribs in a crock pot. That sounds good. I haven't used the crock pot in a long time. I don't do slow cooking super often. It's kind of like the exact opposite of what wok cooking is. But I'm all for the beef ribs. So that's our sauce. Yeah, I'm gonna add a little bit of sugar. I'm gonna go off book a little bit because we're leaving the chicken marinade out. I'm gonna add, this is going to be half a tablespoon, just half, of brown sugar. And that's gonna give us a little bit of malted sweetness. It's gonna complement and kind of like add to the same kind of sweetness that you're gonna get from that dark soy sauce. And I think it's gonna be a nice complement. It's also the form of sweetness that you would get initially from the sugars that are added to that chicken marinade, which we're leaving out today. So that's our sauce. I'm gonna set that aside. All right. I think we're done chopping stuff. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to set up today before we head up over to the stove is an ice bath. It's super important. A really important element to anytime that you're working with fresh Shanghainese noodles like we are today. As we want a way, so what we're going to be working with today, these are handmade noodles. So the original version of the hot and spicy chow mein that you can find at Shandong, it's made with handmade noodles. I think they make them in-house. I happen to be able to get my hands on handmade noodles because I live across the street from, or live down the street from a noodle shop that makes these by hand. Very, very useful. If you can't get your hands on noodles like this though, if you're not so lucky, you can also just totally use packaged stuff. Generally, in most Chinese markets, you'll be able to find this stuff. If you're not near a Chinese market, you can also substitute it with any kind of, what I've always said is Italian handmade pasta is probably the next closest thing, although I think that's made with egg. Or if you're really in a pinch, you could also just use dry spaghetti. Same thing. Not the same thing, but similar. What's most important to know about these noodles, though, because that they are so fresh, as you can see, they're not like dry spaghetti, not dry fettuccine either, is that they're going to cook really quickly, usually about 2 minutes on the dot, which means that when we finish cooking it, we want to be able to stop its cook as accurately as possible. So since anytime that you're cooking something in 2 minutes, what that means is that once you pull it out of heat, it's going to overcook pretty quickly because it will carry over cook, which means essentially it will continue to cook after you pull it off heat because it's got residual heat that's still going. So what I like to do, especially when we're working with fresh noodles like we are today, is we're going to set up an ice bath here, and that's essentially just a way to halt the cooking process of our noodles more accurately. So if we were to do it without the ice bath, what we would end up doing is we'd have to pull it off a little bit earlier, closer to like a minute and a half. And that's essentially just trying to account for the fact that once you pull it off of that heat, those noodles, they're going to continue to cook, which is not ideal. All right, let's head over to the stove. Cool. Let's switch this out. It's the wrong burner. So over on the stove, I've got a pot of water that's going to come to a boil. That's actually, I think it's already boiled. It is, because I did that prep work. Cool. So over on the stove, we have a pot of water at a rolling boil, and then we're going to drop these noodles in. And when I say 2 minutes, I mean 2 minutes exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop these in gently, because they're very delicate. And then we're going to set a timer, so 2 minutes on the dot. So we're going to roll 2 minutes, and then we're going to pull those out. And in those 2 minutes, what I like to do is be a little bit conscious, at least, of agitating these noodles so that they don't clump up. Mostly what I'm worried about is they might sink to the bottom and sort of like stick to the bottom of the pot, which is not great either. So, a couple of things that we're going to not do today, which if you're familiar with more of the Italian style of cooking pasta. There's a couple of things that don't come up in Chinese food at all. The reservation of pasta water, that's not really a Chinese thing. And also the really, really aggressive way of salting pasta water, that's also not a thing either. So that element of pasta water, that's not really a thing that happens in Chinese food. So we don't really treat the pasta water the same in the way that in Italian cooking you will often see pasta water referred to as liquid gold, because it's like the main thing that you use to build out sauces. That's not a big thing in Chinese food. So we're leaving all of that part out, so we're not going to aggressively salt the pasta water, and we're also not going to be really, really conscious about reserving pasta water either. We can pretty much just strain it and dump, because it's not part of what we're going to do to create thick sauces. So if you're more familiar with things like carbonara, I actually just shot a carbonara video today, this is why top of mind. But if you're familiar with a carbonara, it's based off of an egg slurry. That's a combination of egg and Parmesan cheese. That egg slurry only comes into a creamy carbonara sauce once it's combined with that pasta water. So things like that, that's also true with like bologneses and any like ragus, all of those pasta sauces. They all come together from that pasta water because it's coming from the start of the pasta water. So in Italian cooking, that reservation of the water that the pasta is cooking in, really, really, really important. In Chinese food, not really as relevant because we're not creating the same kind of qualities. We're not creating a thick, creamy sauce today. So, and this is also what I've come across is not also very apparent in either Thai food or Korean food or Japanese food like ramen. So not really apparent in ramen, udon, most Thai noodles, chow fan, all of those things. I have not come across it in most of that Asian style of cooking. So we're at 2 minutes. I'm going to pull this off of heat. Like I mentioned before, just going to dump that water and drop it into our ice bath. So very important. This is why it's so important to make sure that that ice bath is already set up. Sid the Kid, you're great. Thank you. You're great too. So I'm dropping this into my ice bath and I'm tossing it a little bit to make sure that that ice and the cold water of our ice sort of moves through those noodles. And you'll notice we have these nice, perfectly cooked noodles. If we didn't have this ice bath, these noodles, they would go from perfectly cooked to overcooked probably within like a minute or so because they would continue to cook from residual heat, which is not ideal. So very, very important. If we want to be accurate with our cook time, reserve or set up an ice bath before you finish cooking. Cool. So what I'm going to do, so what I also like to do, and this I think is actually an element of a lot of chow mein, is a marinade to our noodles first. So what we're going to do is we're going to sear our noodles prior to cooking, or prior to combining with the rest. Really is how you get that like independently flavored quality to your noodles, is because they're par cooked. So they're like, we're going to coat it in a quick marinade of sesame oil and dark soy sauce. And then what we're going to do is combine it with the rest of our stir fry, and that's how you get, like if you've ever had chow mein where the noodles are already a little bit crispy because they're like seared in the wok. That's because the chow mein has been cooked, or the lo mein noodles, excuse me, have been cooked already prior to entering the wok fry. So what we're going to do, that's a single tablespoon of sesame. Is it one set? Followed by, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of dark soy sauce. And then we're just going to toss this to combine. And that dark soy sauce and the sesame oil, actually, they're very, very concentrated, so you'll notice. It doesn't take much. We're just going to give it a quick toss, and you'll notice that it coats those noodles pretty quickly. Drop noodles on the floor. So that's our noodle marinade. If you wanted to stop right now, you could even just eat these noodles right now. They are already cooked. And they're already actually quite flavorful too because they're tossed in dark soy sauce. But what we're going to do is head over to the stove and we're going to give a quick wok sear to these noodles instead. Hey, that's Ham Charo. Everyone, that's Ham Charo. Ham Charo is the hamster that eats ramen. He only gets to eat when somebody feeds him, which is when somebody subscribes on the YouTube channel. So if you want to feed Ham Charo, please hop over to the YouTube channel and give it a subscribe. We're working our way up to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please do that. I think we're at like right around 47, something like that. Cool. So over on the stove, I've got my wok heating up. Here's 4 tablespoons of peanut oil. As always, we're going to give this wok a good long yao, which is essentially just coating that wok in that cold oil for our non-stick surface. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and drop our noodles in and give these a toss. Move this. So what I like to do, usually those noodles, they take about 3.5 minutes or so to really start picking up some color and sear. Mazamila, yeah, cool. I can basically read that. My Chinese has been getting better. So what I like to do is go for about 4 minutes on the sear. It kind of depends. It kind of depends on how hot you're able to get that wok. So I like to keep an eye on it. Usually I'm shooting around 3 to 4 minutes, but really what we're doing is just making sure that we are conscious about whether or not things are sticking to the bottom of the wok, which you'll notice is starting to happen. So if you do notice stuff is sticking, it just means that you're not agitating it quite enough. And just make sure that we give those noodles a good solid toss every maybe 5 seconds or so, and that's just going to keep stuff from sticking to the bottom of the wok, which is not what we're after. There we go. Fried noodles, yeah, I knew that was, I recognized the first word from youtiao, and I recognized the second word from noodles, because I would know words for foods. That's basically all of my extent of Chinese food, or Chinese Mandarin. Oh, come on, yeah, Turnian. Thank you. Yeah. I did learn Chinese when I was a kid, and then I studied it for like 3 years, but I was more interested in girls, so I didn't pay attention. So I've been relearning it on Duolingo, but it's pretty tough. Language, it's a lot easier to learn when you're young. So if you can kind of see it, yeah, you can almost see it. Our noodles, they're starting to pick up a little bit of color. They're getting a little bit darker, and they're kind of starting to get a little bit of a sear going. That's what we're after. There is some of that texture and like crispiness. So by far, this is going to take the longest part of our cook time today, is searing these noodles, because I think it usually for me is about 3 to 4 minutes. Again, kind of depending on like how hot that wok is getting. And again, the main thing that we're trying to avoid is this. So you'll notice that as I start shaking the wok, these noodles are starting to stick to the wok. That's sort of what we're after, because it means that it's starting to crisp up, which is kind of the whole point of what we're doing right now. But we want to make sure that it doesn't stick too much, because what will happen after that is it's going to start breaking up when you start trying to scoop it off of the wok, and then you're going to have broken noodles, which is not good. Watching Taiwanese TV shows, oh yeah. Yeah, that's something that I've been doing actually, but not Taiwanese TV shows. I've been watching a lot of like kung fu movies, but a lot of them are in Cantonese. I've been watching a lot of Bruce Lee movies, and almost all of the Bruce Lee discography is in Cantonese, which is a lot harder for me because I already speak quite a bit of Mandarin. So a lot of the Mandarin, so I watch a lot of Donnie Yen. But yeah, lots of Kung Fu movies. That's how I'm learning Chinese right now. I didn't Duolingo. Taiwanese TV though, that's a good idea. Alright, we're getting there. I'm gonna let this go for maybe another minute or so. Yeah. Warrior, yeah, I did. Warrior, that's a really great show. If anyone has not watched Warrior yet, that show is really killer. Which is done by Shannon Lee, who is Bruce Lee's daughter. And it's a show that's like loosely developed off of like a bunch of notes from Bruce Lee. I think they were like notes for, I think it was for a book, or maybe it was for a movie. I don't think it was originally supposed to be a TV show. I did see it recently got renewed for a 3rd season. I'm super excited for. Yeah, screenplay, that's what it was. It was a Bruce Lee screenplay. Yeah, cool. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. We got these nice crispy noodles floating around. Actually, I can pull this off and we can show you guys on the better camera. Nope, not if the camera's not on. There we go. Alright, so here's our finished noodles. We could take a look with the zoom lens now and take a closer look. Focus. There we go. So we have all this nice crisping and coloring here. So this is probably something that you recognize from like most chow mein that you've had. And the way that they get that, so we have all of these noodles that are nice and crisped up. All of that black stuff, the charring that's starting to happen. That's really, really important to how you get those nice crispy noodles that you recognize from most chow mein. Is it's par cooked first, so it's cooked in the wok prior to the stir fry, and that's how you get this nice texture. Without that par cook, it would basically just be spaghetti, which is not terrible. It's not the end of the world without the par cook, but if you're trying to get that quality of noodle that you recognize from basically all chow mein, that's how it's done. You see a lot of white guys getting beat up with racial slurs. Yeah, actually, and I did a bit of research on their Wikipedia. A lot of the racial slurs they made up because they don't have English translations. So like the racial slur that they use for onion, I don't think that that's a real thing. I think that's just a slur that they made up themselves, which I thought was really funny. They just made up racial slurs. Cool. So next up, what we're going to do is we're going to start searing our protein next. So we're going to repeat, this is another 4 tablespoons of peanut oil, then we're going to give 1 more long yao. And if you were working with chicken, this would be the time to do this with chicken. Today we're working with tofu, so we're going to do that with our tofu today, carefully. As I mentioned this earlier too, but if you're working with tofu like we are today, you want to remember that tofu is bound together with water. And anytime that you're introducing water to hot oil, what it means is that you're eventually going to start splattering. That's a pretty thing. That's pretty much bound to happen. So what you should be doing is probably tongs. I'm lazy. But if you're not burning your hands, get out a pair of tongs and do that. What I'm doing is I'm adding these 1 piece at a time, which is a little bit laborsome, but I found it kind of important because we're trying to make sure that we have lots and lots of surface area to our protein today. Wok, because it's going to be how we get a nice solid sear. Without all of that surface area, so just like drop it in the way that I dropped in those noodles. What would happen is eventually some of that tofu would start stacking on top, so it would like fall on top like that, which is not what we're after. When that tofu stacks on top of another piece of tofu, what's going to happen is it's going to steam. It's not actually in the surface of the wok, and that's not what we're after. So we're not trying. What we're just trying to do right now is develop a the area of our tofu. So what I like to do, add it 1 piece at a time, and then, whoops, wrong camera. You can also let me know if we're on the wrong camera. But what I like to do is add it one piece at a time, and then rotate that wok. So if you're working in a round bottom wok, this is actually not quite enough oil. But what I like to do is give it a little bit of a rotation. What we're trying to do is give the parts of tofu that are on the outside ring a little bit of an opportunity to get in contact with all of that oil. So what we're trying to do is sear the surface area of our tofu, and that's going to be how we get that. Without it, it's basically just clumps of tofu, which is not great. So in order to do that, that requires a couple of things. The first thing that it requires is high heat, which is why our wok is really great for searing. But the second and most important thing that is involved in a sear, but the second, probably the most important thing that's involved, is that it has to have lots and lots of oil. If you don't have oil involved in a sear, it's not going to sear, it will just burn, which is not great. So that's the main difference between searing and burning. A seared involves that oil, burning is just dry. So there's lots and lots of oil involved. That's a little bit, might even be a little bit more than a quarter cup of oil. That's really, really important so that we can get all this good textured crispiness to our if you were working with the chicken in the original recipe, we would be doing the exact same thing, but we would also be doing it at 2.5 minutes on the dot. I found that tofu would take a little bit longer to sear. I think that's because it has a little bit more water in it. So usually with tofu, I go sometimes even longer than that. It takes a little bit longer. In either case, the process is the exact same thing. If you're like to make as much as possible, the exterior is making nice solid contact with that oil so that it doesn't burn. Oil, it's just going to start burning. Is it tofu? Yeah. Go nuts. It's a great username. Yeah, it is tofu. So what we're working with today, if you're not types of tofu, what we're working with today, which is not my favorite type of tofu, but it is if you are going to substitute it out for meat. Firm tofu is the way to go. And what I like to do when I'm working with firm tofu is I don't like, there's a couple of ways that I have approached tofu. My favorite way of doing it actually is in a stir fry, usually with something really delicate like a very soft or silk tofu. And that's essentially, you could almost think of it as a garnish. It just sort of goes in right on top and it's just added to the stir fry at the very, very end. And that sort of helps keep that integrity because it's so delicate. When we're working with firm tofu, my main goal is to give it some texture. Inevitably not really going to taste like much because it's just tofu. So what I like to do is go for texture instead of flavor, which is why we're searing today. Tofu, especially if you're working on using it in a recipe that uses chicken, like we are today, is that we want to give it a little bit more time. We're going to shed a little bit more water. So if we were using chicken, we would pretty much be there here in about 2 minutes. Today we're going to give that a little bit closer to 4 minutes because that tofu, as it starts kicking out all of that water, it's dropping the temperature of our wok. So we want to make sure we have nice, good, solid crispiness going on before we start tossing. Yeah. Cool. And the second and the third and most important thing to remember about tofu before forget, if you're not using chicken like we are today, if we were using chicken, we could go ahead and give it a really aggressive toss and just sort of start tossing from here. With firm tofu like this, it's a little bit more delicate. We don't want to give like a really heavy and like aggressive toss like that because it's going to start breaking. Give it a dislodge, and then we can give it a toss. But again, I'm not going aggressively and starting to give it like any kind of stir frying or shaking or anything like that because it's going to start fracturing the tofu and then we're going to have broken pieces of tofu, which is not what we're after. So you can see it happening in our bowl or in our wok already. Here's all this nice dark, deep and crisping happening in our tofu. That's what we're looking for there, is all of that deep crisping up. Without that crisping, we're basically just going to have clumpy tofu. Not good. So this is what we're trying to avoid here, is tofu stacking on top of itself. So you notice that I'm like shaking the tofu so that things don't start stacking on top of other tofu. Because when that tofu starts landing on top of itself, the pieces that are sitting on top, they're not going to sear anymore. They're basically just going to steam, which is not what we're after here. So what I like to do is make sure that we have that tofu nice and spread out, and that's going to be how we start picking up all of that nice color. Is this a vegetarian dish? Is it a vegetarian dish? Yes, it is. It is a vegetarian dish. It's not vegan, but it is a vegetarian dish. The original recipe that we did used chicken thigh, which makes it not vegetarian. But today we're doing it with tofu because I forgot to buy chicken. So here we are. We're using tofu. So yeah, I also say this with like most of the noodle dishes that I do. Is many of the dishes that I stir fry, they can be done with tofu and it will work out just the same. So the same thing with like the pad thai, the pad kimao, the pad siu, all of those noodles you can. The vermicelli noodles, we did that with chicken. Most of those things I use chicken thigh. You can totally substitute out from tofu and it's going to work okay. So this is looking nice and crispy. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. I think we're ready for our wok fry. Right? Cool. So I'm going to let that wok reheat. It'll give it like another minute to reheat. And then what we're going to do is start stir frying our veggies next, and then we can combine. So you'll notice if you've been watching since the beginning of this stream that we have now cooked 2 different things on 2 separate occasions without leaving any of it in the wok. So we've par-cooked our noodles and we've par-cooked our tofu too. If we were doing chicken, we would have done the same thing with that chicken instead of the tofu. And the reason that I keep removing stuff is because, so you notice we started at the end of that cook with that tofu, is that as you start adding stuff to the wok and as it starts filling up, the wok is going to have more and more trouble staying hot. And this is a process that we involve mainly in home cooking. Because in restaurants you'll have these really aggressive jet engine burners that are built for woks, so they're able to sustain a little bit more heat. So if we were using a wok burner, we wouldn't really have this problem. But in a home range, because our home ranges are not able to stay as hot as much as those are, what I like to do is a process is called batch cooking, where we start removing stuff from the wok and cooking them one at a time. And that enables us to flash cook stuff at really high heat for a brief amount of time without losing that heat in the wok. So. If we weren't removing stuff, it would start getting lower and lower heat in our wok, and then we would eventually end up with a mushy stir fry because we're now cooking on medium heat, which is never a good. All right. So I'm going to add. This is going to be another. This is now maybe 2 tablespoons of peanut oil. You want to start. We're going to start going easy on the oil at this point. Because you'll also want for that each after a batch cook, you're also adding more oil. Once all of those things end back up into the wok, all of the oil that's involved is also going to end up back in the wok. So you want to start going easy at this point because we have removed so many things. So that's my aromatics. That's garlic and ginger going in. And we're going to bloom this until fragrant. Then I'm starting off with my carrots in first. And then I'm going to give those carrots a little bit of a head start, usually about a minute or 2. They are a lot more dense than our other veggies. So I like to give them a good solid head start, just so that we don't end up with a like really chewy, not our ideal carrot. Tofu looking amazing. Yeah, thank you. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube Friday. So today we're cooking through a recipe that came out on the channel last Friday for a hot and spicy chow mein, which is loosely inspired by the hot and spicy chow mein that you can find, which if you're in the area or if you're in the Bay Area at all, If you've ever asked where to get Chinese food in Oakland, that's probably the place that most locals will point. Really famous, like locally really famous. And their chow mein is really popular. So we're going to take a shot at that today. If you have any questions for me, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. Hopefully I'll be able to answer some of them. I haven't used snow peas in any of my recipes. I love snow peas. I actually have not really found a good use for it yet. But good questions. I do love snow peas. I just haven't found a good application of them yet. But that kind of makes me want to cook something with snow peas in it. Thank you for asking. What I'm adding next, this is my dried Tianjin peppers. So Tianjin peppers, if you're not familiar, they're dried, obviously, but also they are not edible, so very important that once we're done cooking with them, you can either pull them out. I like to leave them in because I think they're pretty, but you're not going to be able to eat them. What's most important if you're working with Tianjin peppers is we're trying to make sure that they get good solid contact with our hot oil, and that's going to bloom out lots and lots of capsaicin from them. But yeah, snow peas. My mom used to order a veggie dish. I think it was like a Hong-Sao tofu with snow peas in it, which is like basically like a fried tofu, braised in like a braising sauce and then done with other veggies. So we did a Hong-Sao tofu on the channel a while ago, but it used bok choy instead of snow peas. So maybe that's what I'll do. I'm gonna have to brainstorm what are good uses of snow peas. Alright, there's our Tianjin peppers, and then we're going to start adding next is my onions. Those onions, you'll notice they're only going to be in the wok pretty briefly because we don't want them to overcook, and an onion is very delicate. So we're just going to add it, basically combine, and then add the remainder of our ingredients. We want our onions to be relatively crispy here. If they're in the wok for too long, they're going to start overcooking, which is not our ideal scenario. And then here's our noodles going back in. Followed by our tofu, or if we were using chicken, this is where the chicken would come back in. And then last up is our sauce. So what we're going to do, I do pretty much any stir fry, but definitely any time that we're working with a sauce base that is using dark soy sauce like we are today, is we're going to add it a little bit at a time, usually about maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons at a time, and then we're going to toss, kind of take a look, pay attention to the general color and texture of your stir fry. You can stop and taste too if you're really concerned. But what we're really trying to make sure that we do is that we don't over season our stir fry at this point, because that dark soy sauce is very concentrated. So don't at this point be very conscious about dropping that sauce all in at once, which I've seen lots of people do, which is never a good idea. Kind of depending on the volume of all of the other ingredients that you've added. You may or may not end up using all of that sauce, and if you don't use all of that sauce, it's not the end of the world. Don't feel terrible about throwing a tablespoon or so of sauce out. It's not a big deal. Just don't add it, and it's not the end of the world. But if you do add it and it doesn't need it, it's going to ruin the whole dish, which you don't want to do. So we're in the end zone right now, and you can absolutely blow it. So what I'm doing, because I've cooked times, is that I'm mostly just paying attention to the general color and texture of our stir fry. But what we can also do, which I might actually do, is stop and taste. Give it a taste and adjust. What does it need? And add something. If it needs salt, add salt. If it needs more soy sauce, add soy sauce. Yeah, that's pretty good already. I'm gonna add a little bit more of this. Give it one more toss. And that's gonna do it. Yeah, I should have a TV show. Thank you. Like, deservedly have a TV show. I like it better with the typo. So last thing that we want to do anytime that we're cooking in carbon steel, especially if you're cooking in a carbon steel wok like we are right now, is you want to give that wok a good rinse. It's very useful. It's not the end of the world if you forget. I have definitely forgotten many times. But carbon steel, it has this quality about it, is that while it's hot, stuff just comes right off. So if you give it a good rinse and if it's seasoned properly, you don't really have to do much cleaning. It pretty much just cleans itself. If you forget and you go sit down, start eating, and come back maybe 20 minutes later, once the wok is cold and you try and clean it, you're going to have a lot more trouble getting this thing clean because things will start sticking to it because that non-stick surface will have disappeared on you. So do yourself clean the wok right after you finish cooking. It's going to be a little bit easier to clean for you. So at this point, if you're really diligent, that they're going to do, they are not edible. You don't want to try and eat them. I could probably eat them, but they're not going to be very tasty. What I like doing, because I like it when my dishes are pretty, especially for the camera, is I like to add them on top because they're pretty. But if you don't want to, or if you don't feel like dealing with it, you can also just leave it in. That's also the same reason why lots of dishes, you'll see them sitting at the bottom of the dish. That's because they're the last things out of the wok. So lots of times I see like fried chicken done and you'll see a whole bed of that stuff sitting at the bottom. Was it wet? Yeah, Poppycock, also a good username. Was it wet? Yeah, so what I like to do with the wok is give it a good rinse with a little bit of water. And that's basically just getting all of the debris off. Because my sink happens to be right behind the stove, what I like to do is just pull it right off of the stove while it's really hot still and give it a quick rinse. And that's going to basically just rinse everything off. If you've done the non-stick surface properly, everything should come off. So what we just did, everything came right off because of all of the searing. Nothing was sticking to the wok. If you haven't done it properly, or if you've been cooking something that's going to stick, this happens to me a lot when I do anything with eggs, like pad thai or pad keema, pad see ew, fried rice, all of that stuff that involves eggs. Tends to wok a little bit. So usually we'll end up, when I do those sorts of things, doing a little bit of scrubbing, usually maybe 5 seconds of scrubbing, because that egg is starting to stick to the wok. But with something like this, it comes right off. Very useful. All right. So again, if you don't care for the tangent peppers, you can absolutely start picking them out right now. I think they're pretty, so I like to leave them, but to each their own. And the last thing that we're going to do is finish with a bit of the greens of our green onions. I happen to have some left over from the food booth, so I'll have to chop them. And I'm going to do that. Carrots in the presentation. That's some carrots. There we go. That looks nice. Cool. Let's give this tofu a taste. Oh, that's super good. Tofu, maybe my second favorite way of doing tofu. Is really just give it a little bit of a sear what we're after when we're cooking that tofu. You also want to remember anytime that you're cooking tofu is that tofu doesn't need to be cooked. It's already cooked, just like, unlike raw meat, which has to be cooked to a certain point. Tofu is already cooked, so you're not really doing any cooking. Actually, what you're doing is just going for texture, so we're not trying to impart any flavor. Stop trying to make tofu taste like something that's never going to taste like anything. Stop trying to do that. That's never in most Chinese food a thing that you come across, because tofu doesn't taste like anything, so stop trying to make it taste like something. What I like to do, if I'm working with firm tofu like we are today, in the application of its replacing something like chicken or steak, is just go for something with texture, and that's going to give this nice bite to the dish without adding anything like bland or too bland, at least. And then all of the remaining flavor is going to come from, first off, is coming from that noodle marinade, which is very nice. It gives this nice color and crispy quality to our noodles. But second, and more importantly, that's where all of the sauces come into play. And all of that heat is really, really important. So if we're keeping track, there are 3 different sources of heat in our hot and spicy chow mein, because it's the most important thing. It's right in the name. It's hot and it's spicy. So that hot and spicy is coming from, number 1, the doubanjiang, which is a very, very aggressive type of heat. There's only a single tablespoon in the entire pound of noodles that we just cooked. And then 2 tablespoons of that lao gan ma, which is where all of that oily and like crispy chili flake heat is going to come from. It's also got a nice little bit of like a bite to it, which is really interesting. And then the last and more like aromatic quality to our heat today is these tangerine peppers, which we bloom out in that hot oil, and it kind of adds a little bit of more of an aromatic flavor to it, which I love. So they're also really pretty. Cool. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came out with the recipe for this hot and spicy chow mein, which is a part of a larger series that we've been doing, paying homage to a lot of the dishes that you'll find in a lot of the restaurants here in the Oakland East Bay area. So today, particular hot and spicy chow mein is paying homage to the one that you can find at Shandong in Oakland. If you're local to the San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland, San Francisco area, generally if you ask where to find good Chinese food, that's probably the first place that comes up. If you're asking an Oakland native, you're probably going to get referred to Shandong. I've been eating there for probably close to 2 decades now, and they're probably one of the most legendary Chinese spots here in the entire area. So. I love this dish. If you haven't checked out that the YouTube channel, there's a whole series that's dedicated to basically just all of the restaurants in the area. So, definitely a fun series to take a look at. If you haven't yet, pop over to the YouTube channel and check out what's going on. We have new recipes coming out every Friday. So coming up this Friday is a tomato egg stir fry, which is a fun breakfast dish to throw together. Pretty quick and easy one to do too if you don't fuck it up 3 times like I did. That one's coming up this Friday. Friday after that is going to be, we're going to kick off our Chinese fusion series with a lapchang carbonara, which I'm super excited for. Somebody sent me a recipe and then I sort of redeveloped or reworked it for a while. And that's going to be 2 Fridays from now. And stuff like that. Those are out every Friday. If you haven't yet, hop over to the YouTube, check out what's going on over there. We're streaming Tuesdays and Thursdays, new recipes every Friday, and we're working our way up to 5,000 subscribers. Let's hit our subscriber goal. Feed him, Chow. He's very hungry. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good to see you again. By the way, I haven't seen you in the chat a while. Snow peas, yeah, definitely gonna do some snow peas very soon. That's also the other thing that I like to mention. So today, in the original recipe that I had published last Friday, it uses a zucchini, which I forgot to buy. I forgot to go to the grocery store today, which is why we don't have both don't have the chicken and don't have the zucchini, but we're improvising and replacing them with a couple of other things. So we replaced that chicken with some tofu, and then we just omitted that zucchini. Because I don't think it's that important. I actually think it'll be just fine with the carrots already. So, yeah, but the reason I brought that up is because you can substitute it with pretty much any veggie you want. You could probably throw some broccoli in there if you had it. You could throw in a bell pepper. That would be really tasty. Snow peas, also very tasty. Bok choy would be a really great addition. Bok choy, I didn't think to use it until just now. So all of those really great additions to throw into a stir fry like this. So. Thermodynamics, cool, yeah. Cool. All right, so that's it, everyone. Check out the YouTube channel. We'll be back on Thursday, and we're cooking Kung Pao chicken, that's what we're doing. We're cooking Kung Pao chicken, and I will buy chicken. Alright, tune in on Thursday for Kung Pao chicken. Check out the YouTube channel Friday for tomato egg stir fry, and then I'll see you soon. Alright, thanks everyone. Bye.
If you think that you don't know, never mind that you still don't love yourself. No, you can find it from somebody else. No, everybody's got to grow up. Sometimes funny how we shoot the move. Still, when we fight it, baby. Alright, never mind. Then I found what I'm looking for, baby. Yes, I found it now. Alright, I'm falling in love with love, and it's bringing me down. You want to be, baby, yes, you want to be, baby. Alright. Oh, wait, now, babe. I said everybody wants to be. I still got dreams, but they don't love me like they used to love it. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want it. And yes, I still got dreams, but more like I took it of my 20s, and it's breaking me down. You want to be, baby, yes, sir. You want to be. Stone on your all the time. But you poured out your heart, and I didn't wanna waste it. There's nothing like your love to give me You're red, sweet, and strawberry wine. Ooh, yeah. You're as warm as a glass of beer. Darling, I'll stay the storm on your love all the time. You're as smooth as Tennessee whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. You're bad, warm as a glass of brandy. Darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time.
Still